Nobody gave French Montana a real shot going into this, and that's not an exaggeration. That was the open conversation online before a single song played. Most fans had already handed Ross the victory before the battle even started. People were joking that the whole night would basically come down to who had the better Drake feature, because both of them have leaned heavily on Drake collabs throughout their careers. And even with that joke floating around, Ross was still the clear favorite. His catalog, his presence, his reputation. Everything pointed to Rose walking out of that building with the W dot, and then French Montana went and won 10 rounds to Ross's 9. When this Verzuz was first announced, the reaction online was genuinely underwhelming. Fans were calling it a potential snooze fest. One user put it plainly before the battle even started. Ross got the better catalog and is the better rapper. And then French Montana went and won 10 rounds to Ross's 9. When this Verzuz was first announced, the reaction online was genuinely underwhelming. Fans were calling it a potential snooze fest. One user put it plainly before the battle even started. Ross got the better catalog and is the better rapper. Ross is going to be the clear winner, especially after the new Verzuz format live on stage. French got hits but isn't a good live performer. That was the general consensus. Ross was walking in as the heavy favorite, and almost nobody saw French flipping this thing. The battle was held in Los Angeles and streamed live on Apple Music. Ross came in the way a heavyweight champion walks into a fight, with the assumption that this thing was already decided. Hustlin practically built his entire mythology. BMF was an anthem.
First song on the list, Rich Forever featuring John Legend.
Aston Martin music felt like luxury in audio form. Teflon Don as a body of work is genuinely difficult to argue against, and Ross has a live presence that very few people in rap can match. He commands a room just by walking into it, and throughout the night, he leaned into exactly that, pulling out Stay Shemin, Aston Martin music, BMF, and Hustlin, to remind the crowd exactly what his catalog carries. French approached it from a completely different angle. He wasn't going to out-catalog Ross on paper, and he knew that going in. Round after round, he stacked records that didn't just sound good. They felt good inside a live crowd. Shot Caller, Unforgettable, Ain't Worried About Nothing. His run on Fat Joe's All the Way Up. Work Remix. These are records that move people physically and in a live format in front of a voting crowd that matters more than what looks better on a ranked list. By the time the night reached its biggest moment, Unforgettable was going up against Ross's Devil in a New Dress, and the room made the call without hesitating. Final score, 10-9, French Montana. The fan reaction split almost immediately, and it split hard. One side refused to accept it. People were posting things like, Rick Ross has a better discography, and Unforgettable over Devil in a New Dress. What are we doing? Those arguments aren't wrong on paper, and that's exactly what made the debate so loud after the fact. Ross's catalog carries more weight in terms of critical legacy, and there's a genuine case to be made that on pure quality, he wins that argument. But the other side kept pointing back to the format itself. Verzuz isn't a debate show. It runs on energy, and French had that room locked round after round. Even people who walked in skeptical about French admitted the night turned out far better than they expected. Culture got reminded of just how many hits both of these men have delivered over the years, and that reminder alone made the whole night worth it. But here's the moment that honestly ran further than the winner announcement and took on a life of its own. When Aston Martin music came on during Ross's set, he stopped everything. He told the DJ he wanted it played without Drake's vocals. He said no Drake vocals out loud into the mic in front of that entire crowd, then told the audience to sing that part themselves, calling Drake Lil Nan while standing on that stage. That clip was everywhere before most people even knew the final score. People who hadn't watched a single second of the Verzuz were talking about that moment, specifically Dot. And this wasn't random. Ross had already done this at a previous show, performed Aston Martin music, and handed Drake's part to the crowd that time too. This is a deliberate pattern, because their whole relationship fell apart in 2024 when Drake took shots at Ross during the Kendrick Lamar situation. And Ross didn't absorb it quietly. He fired back hard, coined BBL Drizzy, dropped champagne moments as a direct shot, and has been publicly cutting Drake out of his world ever since, doing it on a Verzuz stage in Los Angeles in front of a live crowd and a streaming audience on Apple Music. That was a statement delivered in front of the maximum possible number of people, and the crowd in that room loved every second of it. Now, here's where French Montana comes back into this. Because French wasn't just the guy who won the battle that night, he was the man who had been sitting in the middle of the Ross and Drake situation for over a year before that stage even happened, and the way he handled it tells you a lot about how he operates. French has real history with both men. His relationship with Ross goes back to before either of them were at the level they're at now. Ross was literally one of the people who helped bring French into the mainstream. French signed a joint venture between Bad Boy Records and Ross's Maybach Music Group in 2012. And from that point, the two built records, built a business relationship, and kept that bond intact, publicly through everything. Before the Verzuz, French told Complex that stepping on stage with Ross felt like a student going up against the teacher. That's how deep that respect runs. And at the same time, French ran in circles that overlapped with Drake throughout his career. Those worlds connected. So when the Ross-Drake beef exploded and the industry started picking sides publicly, French was sitting in a position that had no clean exit. And that discomfort became extremely public when he sat down on Raw Ali's podcast. The interview had started well. French was talking about his growth in the industry, discussing his performance at the World Cup, upbeat and open. Then Ray Ali brought up the Drake and Ross feud. What happened next became one of the most talked about moments of that entire news cycle. French reached over, took off his headset, handed it to Ray Ali, and said, "I'll be right back. I think I double parked my car outside." Then he stood up, walked off set with his entire entourage, and never came back. Producers kept the cameras rolling. French noticed the camera following him out and told them to stop recording. The whole clip was on the internet within hours. The reaction to that moment split exactly the way the Verzuz result would split later. Some fans called it childish and dramatic. One person on X wrote, "He's being dramatic. He knows there ain't nothing else to talk to him about," which might be the most brutally honest take that came out of the whole situation. Others defended him completely, saying if he set boundaries before the interview, those should have been respected. But either way, what that moment actually showed was a man who had made a very deliberate decision. He was not going to sit in a chair and say the wrong thing about two people he had real relationships with. He chose silence over a soundbite. He handed back the headset and walked out rather than hand someone a quote they could use to pull him into something he didn't want to be part of. And then he turned around and did Verzuz with Ross anyway, won the battle, and brought Max B out on that stage. That last part is something that deserves its own weight in this conversation, because the Max B element of the night hit differently for anyone who actually knows the history. Max B and French go back to 2008 when they connected through a mutual in Harlem and started building what became the entire Coke Wave legacy together. They dropped the original Coke Wave tape in 2009, and what they created during that window, before everything changed, became something that influenced a generation of artists, even while Max was completely out of the picture. Max ended up sentenced to 75 years in prison, and French never stopped repping that relationship through all of it. He kept making Coke Wave tapes even while Max was locked up. He kept the name alive. He kept showing up for someone who couldn't show up for himself. When Max finally came home, and the timing of it landed on French's own birthday in 2025. French posted about it like it was the most significant thing that had ever happened in his life. "Can't make this up. My brother really came home on my bay." That's a man talking about someone who matters to him in a way that goes beyond industry. And on that Verzuz stage in Los Angeles, with Ross standing right there, French brought Max out, and they performed Smoking PT, 2 inches live for the very first time. A brand new record that nobody in that room had ever heard. The energy in that building when Max walked out was a different kind of electricity than anything else that happened that night. For people who knew what that moment actually represented, 16 years, a 75-year sentence. 2 men who built something real together before the world pulled them apart. It hit on a completely different level than just a surprise guest appearance. The song is Going On, the upcoming Wave Gods 2 project, which drops May 22nd. Ross has his own album Set in Stone coming June 12th. So both men left that stage with music dropping, momentum behind them, and a night that reminded the whole culture why both of their catalogs matter. And Drake left it with his vocals deliberately removed from his own song by his former collaborator in front of a live crowd that cheered for it. French Montana came into that room as the underdog, the student, the one people said couldn't hold his own live against a catalog like Ross's. He won the voting. He brought his brother home on that stage. He kept his mouth shut about everything that didn't need to be said out loud. And when it was time to let the music speak, he let it speak louder than anything else in the room. He brought his brother home on that stage. He kept his mouth shut about everything that didn't need to be said out loud. And when it was time to let the music speak, he let it speak louder than anything else in the room. Sometimes, the person everyone counted out is the one who understood the assignment from the very beginning.